3 days before Christmas, I got a call from my mom while I was standing in the kitchen making coffee. It was the kind of call that sends a chill down your spine from the very first second, a long silence on the other end, like the caller is struggling to swallow a decision too heavy to speak aloud. I spoke first, my voice barely a whisper. "Mom?" There was a sigh. Then my mother spoke, her voice trembling but trying to stay calm. "Angela, I think you shouldn't come home for Christmas this year." I nearly dropped the coffee cup in my hand. "What are you talking about?" "I know it's hard to hear, but your stepfather Frank and his parents are coming. They don't want to see you." I stood frozen. The tiny kitchen suddenly felt colder than ever. Frank, my mom's second husband, had been part of our lives since I was 11. His parents, the grandparents of his son, had never liked me. But this was the first time my mother openly chose them over me. "We always spend Christmas together," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every year since Dad passed. It's our tradition." Mom didn't respond right away. The silence stretched, twisting something inside me. Finally she spoke, hesitant. "Angela, they said if we stay in touch with you, they'll cut Frank out of the will. They'll cut ties with all of us. Do you understand?" I felt my heartbeat pounding, each thump echoing in my chest like a warning bell. "So this is about money," I blurted out, my voice rising. "It's not just money," Mom said quickly. "They think you've been out of our lives for a long time. I told them we're not in contact anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to pretend I don't exist?" "Just this once," my mom pleaded. "Angela, they're stubborn and they hold grudges. We have to make them believe no one in the family is connected to you anymore. Please try to understand." I cut her off. "No. You want me to erase myself from the family to secure a promise in some will? Is that the price you've put on me?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I could hear it in her shaky breath. She knew she'd gone too far, but she wasn't turning back. I couldn't continue the conversation. I hung up. I collapsed onto the sofa, still clutching the phone. My chest ached like someone had sliced open an old scar that hadn't fully healed. For years, I thought I had accepted it all. My mom's remarriage, Frank always treating me like an outsider, and never truly being part of their new family. But I never thought Mom would go this far. Would choose the people who ignored me, belittled me to my face, just to protect a clause in a will that didn't even exist yet. I thought back to all those winters, me and Mom walking down streets lit with Christmas lights, sipping hot chocolate and talking about our little family of just the two of us. Back then, after Dad died in a car crash, she'd hold me close and promise, "No one will ever replace your dad in my heart, and you are the most precious thing I have." And now, I was the one being pushed out. I stared at the phone, my mind spinning between past and present. Then I opened my contacts and called the only person I knew would understand. Natalie, my half-sister. No one knew the twisted dynamics of this family better than she did. The phone rang for barely 3 seconds before someone picked up. Natalie's cheerful voice came through. "Angela? What's going on? You're calling so early." I swallowed hard. "Mom just called," I said, my voice catching. "She told me not to come home this year, because Frank's parents will be there." A heavy silence. Then Natalie snapped, "What the heck? Is she serious?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Dead serious. And she told me to pretend I never existed." Natalie's voice sharpened. "If you're not welcome, then I'm not going either. They can't treat you like that and expect everything to be okay." I bit my lip as hot tears began to spill down my cheeks. Natalie, the only person in the family who never turned her back on me, was still standing by me, like she always had. That was when I realized Christmas this year wouldn't be like every other. But at least, I wouldn't be alone. I lost my dad when I was 5. A crash on the highway while he was on his way to pick me up from preschool. Mom never talked much about that day, only quietly tucked his old leather wallet into a drawer and kept it there for years. From that day on, it was just the two of us. Winters in Seattle got colder, but Mom always tried to make me feel warm. We lived in a small two-bedroom apartment on the third floor, where sea winds sometimes howled through the old window panes. Even without much money, Mom always baked gingerbread cookies for the holidays and turned the living room into a wonderland of twinkling lights and paper reindeer. I grew up in a love that wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Everything changed when I was 11, when Mom met Frank at a local book fair. He was a quiet man working in tech, a widower with a daughter my age named Amanda. At first, I thought it was great to have a sister, even if not by blood, someone to study and play with. Amanda lived with Frank in a spacious house in Bellevue, and when Mom moved in with them, I thought I was stepping into a new life. But it didn't take long to realize things weren't what I'd hoped. Amanda had a bedroom twice the size of mine. She had a full set of gaming consoles, the latest iPad, and her own Pomeranian, while I got a converted storage room next to the laundry. Frank kept his distance, always polite but cold. But what hurt most was how Amanda's grandparents, Frank's parents, treated me. They visited almost every weekend, showering Amanda with hugs and gifts, while I got a nod from across the room. Once I overheard them telling Mom, "Angela seems like the kind of kid raised without proper discipline. Girls without fathers usually are." They said it like I wasn't standing right behind the door. I'd told Mom everything. She just stayed silent, her eyes briefly sad. "They're old, honey. A little strict," she said, then turned back to chopping vegetables, avoiding my gaze. Amanda and I had some good times together. We did homework, played games, even made a secret club under the dining table. But as we grew older, Amanda started treating me like an outsider. She'd mock the way I talked, call my clothes outdated, and share my private stuff with kids at school. When I fought back, Mom told me to be patient. "You're the one who came later." Then came the summer I was 14. Mom and Frank went on a 2-week trip to Napa Valley, leaving me and Amanda with her grandparents. Usually, I'd stay with Aunt Lena, Mom's sister, but she was away on business. Amanda's grandparents reluctantly agreed to watch us, on the condition that I didn't cause trouble. Everything unraveled after just 4 days. It rained nonstop, so we were stuck indoors. Amanda hogged the computer all day for games, and I just wanted 1 hour to work on my essay. We argued, pushed each other. I didn't mean to, I swear I didn't. But Amanda slipped on the carpet, hit the coffee table, and screamed in pain. She clutched her arm, crying like her whole world had shattered. Her grandparents rushed in, their faces pale when they saw her swollen arm. Without asking, her grandmother grabbed the phone and shouted into it, "That girl attacked my granddaughter! She needs a mental evaluation immediately!" I stood there, heart pounding, trying to explain it was an accident. But no one listened. When the ambulance came, I was locked in the bedroom, the door bolted from the outside. Dinner was slid through the crack with a suspicious glare. I felt like a prisoner in what was supposed to be my home. Mom and Frank came back earlier than planned. No one hugged me, no one asked if I was okay. Amanda whispered that I had pushed her with all my strength, and her grandparents confirmed I'd shown dangerous behavior. Mom avoided my eyes and Frank shook his head. "I don't think I can let her be around Amanda anymore," he said. I was sent to live with Aunt Lena for 2 months. During that time, Mom arranged for me to see a therapist. They called it preventive, but I knew better. They thought something was wrong with me. I stayed silent, no tears, no protest. But inside, I began to build walls. After that summer, I no longer felt like the house in Bellevue was my home. It was someone else's house, where I was just a temporary guest. And Mom, the one who once promised she'd always protect me, was now the first to let go when things got complicated. I left right after graduating high school, carrying an old suitcase and a full scholarship from the University of Minnesota. Mom didn't see me off at the bus station. Frank didn't bother to say goodbye. Only Natalie ran after me, shoved a bag of chocolate cookies into my hand and whispered, "Text me when you get there, okay?" Minneapolis greeted me with golden autumn leaves. I rented a tiny room near campus and worked part-time at the student cafe while attending classes. I knew I couldn't expect any support from Mom, so I didn't allow myself to fall behind. Every penny I spent came from sweat and tears. 4 years of college passed in all-nighters, late shifts, and quiet cries under the blanket whenever I missed Natalie, but I never once regretted it. I majored in business administration and quickly discovered I had a knack for market analysis and organizational strategy. Everything changed when I met Zoe, a classmate and the daughter of the owner of Pine Grove Kitchen restaurant chain. Zoe was nothing like the rich girls I had known. She was genuine, sharp, and openly admitted she was under a lot of pressure after her father handed her the reins of the business following his retirement. One day, after we wrapped up a presentation on supply chain optimization in the F&B industry, Zoe pulled me aside and asked, "Angela, would you be interested in interning at Pine Grove? We could really use someone with your organizational mind." I said yes immediately. No one knew that a single nod would mark the turning point of my life. At first, I was just an intern, handling documents and weekly reports. But after 3 months, I proposed a plan to revamp the menu based on seasonal consumer behavior. We cut over 20 unprofitable items and focused on flexible, customizable dishes. Sales increased by 18% in just 1 quarter. After graduation, Zoe offered me the position of her executive assistant. I moved to the headquarters in Chicago and became her right hand in every development project. Together, we transformed Pine Grove from a dated restaurant chain into a dynamic ecosystem: electric bike delivery services, weekly healthy meal plans, and co-working spaces inside the restaurants, where people could eat and work at the same time. Chain-wide revenue rose nearly 40% in 2 years. Media started mentioning me in articles about young female leaders reshaping the F&B industry. I still lived simply, rented a small apartment, drove the same old car from college, and cooked my own dinners every night. Then one day, Mom called. I still remember that sound, the ringtone buzzing while I was reviewing the quarterly revenue report. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. "Angela?" Mom's voice was so quiet, I thought it was the wind. I don't think that's what it was. I waited. "Frank, he just got laid off. We've been trying everything for months, but we can't cover the mortgage anymore. They're about to foreclose the house." I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe an apology. But none came. Frank got on the phone next. His voice was low and tired. "Angela, I know I haven't been fair to you in the past, but right now we really need your help." I was silent for a long time. Then finally I said, "I'll send the money to cover the mortgage, but that doesn't mean I've forgiven you." From that month on, I transferred a fixed amount to Mom's mortgage account every month. I never called, never wrote, never visited. The only connection between me and them became cold lines on a bank statement. Frank later found a part-time job, but I kept sending money, not because I owed them anything, but because Natalie still lived there, and I couldn't let my sister struggle. I used to think that maybe, with time, my help would show Mom that I had never turned my back, that maybe one day, she'd call just to ask how I was doing. But the only call I got from her in 3 whole years was the one telling me I couldn't come home for Christmas. I was wrong. I thought money could buy back a bit of trust, a sliver of family. But to them, I would always be the name that needed to be forgotten, in exchange for someone else's will. And that day, I decided it was time to cut it off, not just financially, but for good. I sat in my apartment for a long time after hanging up. No more anger, just emptiness. Mom had told me straight up that I wasn't welcome home for Christmas, not because I did anything wrong, but simply because Amanda's grandparents didn't like me, and Mom didn't want to risk losing their inheritance. I used to think that after all the money I quietly sent, after all those months of covering the mortgage, Mom would at least be a little grateful. That if I couldn't be the daughter in her heart, I'd at least be someone she couldn't easily cast aside. I was wrong. The next day, I opened my banking app and canceled every single auto transfer to her mortgage account. A clean decision. No warning, no message. I had nothing left to give them. Not love, not money, not the faint hope that someday they might choose me over outsiders. That evening, Natalie showed up at my place earlier than expected. She brought with her a fake Christmas tree taller than 5 feet, a bag full of string lights, candy canes, and a bunch of pre-wrapped boxes. "This Christmas, we're making our own tradition," she declared, her eyes gleaming. We turned on the music, the apartment glowing with warm yellow lights, and decorated the tree with glass ornaments one by one. Natalie talked about school, her loud friends, and the presentation she'd just finished. I laughed more that night than I had all month, and when she handed me a small silver-wrapped box, I nearly cried. "It's not much," Natalie said softly, "but it's money I saved from my part-time job. I want you to buy something just for yourself, not for anyone else." I hugged her tight. The next day, I called a few close friends, the kind who were staying in the city for the holidays, not going home. Emily, my college classmate, brought boxes of homemade gingerbread cookies. Tyler and Sam, my longtime friends from undergrad, showed up with a stash of board games and a guitar. We turned that Christmas into a real celebration, warm, lively, and genuine. At midnight, we all gathered around the table, raised our glasses of eggnog, and sang, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." I looked around. Faces not tied to me by blood or shared pasts, but each one made me feel like I belonged. For the first time in years, I felt at home. I thought that was the end of it. I cut ties, they stayed silent, a quiet kind of closure. But then, 3 weeks later, Mom called again. I stared at her name flashing on the screen, my hand hesitating. In the end, I picked up. "Angela," she said quickly, getting straight to the point. "There's an issue with the bank payment. Did you forget to send it?" "No," I replied calmly. "I canceled it." "What?" Her voice cracked. "You can't do that. The payment's due today. We were counting on that money." "Then maybe call Amanda's grandparents," I said, voice steady but firm. "You chose them over me. Let them carry that responsibility too." "Angela, that was a moment of weakness. It was a desperate situation." "No," I cut her off. "It was a choice. And now, I get to make mine." After a few seconds of silence, Mom switched to a blaming tone. "You told Natalie not to come home, didn't you? We had to tell her grandparents she was sick. I had to make up a whole story, just because of you," I replied coldly. "So you're willing to lie about your daughter being seriously ill, as long as it means keeping the money from them? Don't judge me until you've been a mother," she yelled. I didn't respond. I simply pressed the button to end the call. From that moment, I never received another call. Natalie still visited me every week. We took walks, cooked together, laughed together. She told me Mom still mentioned me, but in a tone like I was a system error she couldn't erase. But I had made my choice. I was no longer the little girl waiting by the window for her mother. I was a woman who had learned to love herself, and who knew that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to close the door that once broke your heart and go find another way. Even if it starts with loneliness. On a late March afternoon, the sky over Seattle was thick with gray clouds, as if winter still refused to leave. I was buried in plans for the grand opening of Pine Grove's new location in the Fremont area when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was Natalie, but when I looked through the peephole, my hand froze. Standing outside was Mom. Beside her were Frank and Natalie. I opened the door, partly out of curiosity, partly out of concern for my sister. Natalie stepped in first, her gaze gentle, but firm. "I know this is a surprise, but please, just hear them out." I stepped back and let them in. The familiar space suddenly felt stifling. Mom clutched her purse, her eyes scanning the room like she was searching for a memory that never existed. Frank stood still, hands clasped, his face pale with tension. "Angela," Mom began, her voice hoarse. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm asking for a chance to speak. I crossed my arms, standing across from them. Go ahead. She hesitated a moment, then continued. Christmas. I was wrong. I put money ahead of you. I betrayed the very child I was supposed to protect. I said nothing. It was still too early to trust regret, especially when it came after months of silence. Frank spoke for the first time, not avoiding my eyes. Angela, I know I treated you badly. I let my parents control everything. My views, my emotions. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up for you. That was my fault. Only realizing that now, I asked evenly, after all these years, after all the times you ignored me and turned your back like I never existed? Mom nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Each month that the money didn't come, I wasn't upset about losing support. I was upset because I knew, for the first time, you had truly given up on me. I looked at Natalie. She stood in the center of the room waiting. You arranged this? I didn't force them, Natalie said. But I made it clear, if they wanted to hold on to anything left of this family, they had to come and face what they did. Silence settled over us. I looked at the three people, the woman who used to be my whole world, the man who never called me his daughter, and the only sister who never betrayed me, and let out a sigh. What about Amanda's grandparents? I asked. Do they still think I'm someone who needs to stay away to protect their precious will? Frank shook his head slightly. I called them. I told them I wouldn't keep pretending anymore. If that means they cut me out of the will, then so be it. I tilted my head. Sounds like a bold statement. Why now? Because of Natalie, he said. She told us if we didn't face the truth, she'd never come home again. I can't lose both my daughters. That made me pause. What did you just call me? Daughter, he replied, without hesitation. Mom stepped closer and pulled an envelope from her purse. We don't need you to send money anymore. Frank got a new job with a stable income. We're not here to ask for help. We're here to ask for you. I took the envelope. Inside were financial documents and an updated estate plan, where both Natalie and I were listed in Frank's will. For the first time in years, they were trying, really trying, not just with words. That doesn't mean I can trust you right away, I said. Wounds don't just disappear because of a few apologies. Mom nodded. I know. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I won't repeat my mistakes. We're looking into a family therapist, Natalie added. I think we need someone to help untangle what's been buried too long. I looked into their eyes. No coldness, no pretense. None of the things I had become so used to. Just three people, carrying regret and a fragile hope for a second chance. I nodded slightly. I'm not promising forgiveness, but I can try to start again. Mom's face lit up, tears falling freely. Frank exhaled in relief, and Natalie stepped forward to hug me tightly. I stood in the middle of the room, still unsure if I'd done the right thing, but at least, for the first time in a long while, it felt like maybe I could start writing a new chapter on my own terms. Our first therapy session took place on a gloomy Thursday afternoon in the warmly lit office of Dr. Emma Wallace. She was a woman in her 50s with neatly tied gray hair and a voice both calm and sharp, enough to keep anyone from hiding their true feelings for long. I sat between Natalie and Mom with Frank across from us. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the awkward space. Let's begin with something simple, Dr. Wallace said. Each of you, tell me what you hope to get out of this process. Mom was the first to speak. I want my family back. I want Angela to be able to call me Mom without feeling like it's a stranger's word. I didn't react, but something shifted inside me. Frank was more hesitant. I want to understand how I let this happen and fix it if I still can. Natalie simply said, I want everyone to be honest. No more hiding things. When it was my turn, I looked down at my hands and said softly, I want to understand why I was treated like I didn't matter, and I need to know if that can ever change." The room fell silent, but this time, it was the kind of silence we needed. The sessions that followed weren't easy. Some days we talked things through. Other days I walked out with tears streaming down my face. Mom still had her reflexes, defensiveness, excuses. But Dr. Wallace didn't let it slide. "Are you explaining the pain?" she asked during one session, "or trying to justify it?" It stunned Mom into silence. Once, I recounted the time I was locked in the room after the incident with Amanda. Mom looked down in shame, and Frank bit his lip until it turned pale. "I know they were out of line," he said, eyes fixed on his hands. "But I didn't dare stand up for you. I've been controlled by my parents my whole life, and I thought if I stayed silent, everything would stay peaceful." "You thought I would be at peace being locked in a room, eating through a slot like some kind of criminal?" I asked, my voice cracking. Not out of anger, but from a disappointment that had built up for years. Frank looked up, his eyes red. "Angela, when I was your age, my parents threatened to cut off my tuition if I didn't study the major they chose. They threatened to disinherit me if I married someone they didn't approve of. They said they'd disown me if I let my wife's daughter sit at the same table. And I stayed silent through all of it. By the time I realized what I'd lost, you were already gone, too far to hear my apology." I didn't respond right away, but for the first time, I didn't see him as a distant shadow in my memory anymore. He was someone who had been controlled, just like me. We were more alike than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Outside of therapy, we started establishing small habits to rebuild. One dinner a month. Just the four of us, no one else. No talk of money, no mention of Amanda's grandparents, just everyday stories. Natalie's job at the city library, the lasagna Mom was relearning how to make, the new cafe Zoe and I had opened. There were still awkward silences and clumsy moments, but I began to notice real change. Mom stopped saying things like, "It was just a misunderstanding." She started saying, "I'm sorry," more easily, without the word "but" attached. One night after dinner, Frank handed me an envelope. I opened it and found a copy of a revised will. My name and Natalie's clearly listed, with no conditions. "This isn't to make you think we're trying to buy forgiveness," he said. "It's to show you that from now on, no one gets to use money to divide love in this family." I nodded, feeling a small weight lift off my chest. One time when it was just Mom and me in a therapy session, Dr. Wallace asked, "If there's one thing you've never said to Angela but wish you could, what is it?" Mom looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Angela, I let you carry more than any child should have had to. I was wrong to stay silent. But what hurts me the most is knowing you had to learn to live without me. And I don't know how to earn my way back." I didn't cry, but inside me, a door, old and dusty, creaked open. We still weren't a perfect family, but at least this time, we were all walking in the same direction. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own story. One afternoon in early June, with sunlight still lingering on the polished wood of my dining table, Frank invited me into his home office. The space was just as I remembered it. Thick books lined up on the shelves, a small bonsai tree near the window, and that dark brown leather chair that always smelled faintly of new paper. But this time, instead of feeling like an intruder or a guest, I stepped in with a different mindset. Part of me stayed cautious, but the rest was learning to welcome what was genuinely changing. Frank sat behind his desk, his hand resting lightly on a cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten on it. "Angela," he began, his voice deep and slow, "this is a copy of my new will. It was notarized by the lawyer this morning. I wanted you to receive it directly from me." I opened the envelope. Inside was the legal document, along with a clear asset breakdown. No fine print, no hidden strings. My name and Natalie's stood side by side, with specific notes about our shares, regardless of anything from Amanda's side of the family. I told them, "I no longer follow their conditions," Frank said, eyes still on me. They were angry, threatened to cut ties, but I told them I've been cut off from myself for far too long. It's time to fix that. I looked at him and said nothing, but inside something shifted. Not because of what was in the will. I never needed any of it. But because, for the first time, I felt seen as a real part of this family. After that, family dinners became a new tradition, not forced or awkward like before, but genuine get-togethers. We took turns hosting, sometimes at my place, sometimes at Natalie's, and sometimes in Mom's old kitchen, the one that had seen both my childhood and the times I used to avoid the gaze of Amanda's grandparents. But now, they never showed up. Mom had cut ties with them on her own. She changed her phone number and told them clearly, if they wanted to be part of their grandchildren's lives, they had to respect everyone, or no one at all. We started talking about things no one had dared mention before. The time I was locked up after Amanda's fall, how Mom used to avoid the truth, and how Natalie often felt stuck in between. There were tears, there were heavy silences, but not once did anyone deny or deflect anymore. I remember one evening, after Natalie finished talking about her work at the library, Frank suddenly said, "When my daughter got into college, I didn't say anything. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't know how to show it, having never learned how to love without conditions." Mom, sitting beside him, gently took his hand. "Then let's learn together." I left the table that night with an unfamiliar feeling. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for once, I wasn't carrying the weight of our family alone, unseen and unheard. A week later, Natalie sent me a small card. It read, "Real Family Day, first celebration this Saturday. No pressure, no obligation. Come if you want, just bring your honest heart." I laughed when I read it. The card had a doodle on it, 4 people holding hands in front of a giant pizza. Natalie had never been good at drawing, but I still framed it and hung it on my fridge. That night, I sat alone on the balcony, watching the city light up. A year ago, I'd sat in this very spot, wiping away tears after a Christmas call that made me finally see my true place in the family. Now, I was still here, but with a different heart. This hadn't come from easy forgiveness. It came from me standing up, saying enough, and walking away to protect myself. I'd learned a powerful truth. Not everyone born under the same roof will choose to love you the right way, but if you protect your boundaries with courage, sometimes you're the one who teaches them how to love, from the beginning. And in the moment I stopped fearing losing them, was the moment they began to truly value me. The new Pine Grove branch in Fremont officially opened on a sunny Sunday afternoon, with a light breeze carrying the scent of early cherry blossoms. I stood at the front desk, adjusting my name badge, nerves fluttering, even though I was used to this by now. But something was different today. Not just because this was the 10th location Zoe and I had built together, but because for the first time, I had invited my whole family to the opening. When I turned around, I saw them walk in, Mom, Frank, and Natalie. No one wore anything flashy. No exaggerated compliments or false smiles, just genuinely warm eyes and a real hug from Natalie as she whispered, "I'm proud of you." We had dinner upstairs at the restaurant, under soft golden lights and gentle jazz playing in the background. Mom talked about her new garden, Frank shared his home renovation project, and Natalie chattered on about her recent trip to Portland with friends from the library. It wasn't perfect. Mom still occasionally slipped up and said something that made me pause mid-bite. Natalie shot her subtle glances, silent warnings. But this time, no one stormed off. No one shut down. After each misstep, there was a timely apology. After each misunderstanding, a real effort to listen. We had changed, not because of some miracle, but because of deliberate choices. Every day. Once, after a therapy session, Mom pulled me aside and handed me a soft leather journal. "I've written everything I remember in here, the things I did wrong, the things I wish I could redo, not to justify, but so you know, I'm starting over." I didn't open it right away. But I carried it with me as a reminder that some relationships don't die. They just need to be cleared out, rebuilt, and reseated. 3 months later, Natalie moved into her own apartment near downtown. I helped her pack, and then the two of us lay sprawled on the empty floor, staring up at the ceiling like kids discovering the world for the first time. "Do you think our family will stay like this?" she asked, her voice suddenly low. I turned to look at her, shook my head slightly, then smiled. "I don't know, but I believe if they keep choosing love, then yes." "Family is a choice?" Natalie tilted her head. "Yeah, it's not a given. It's something you choose every day. Choosing to stay, to forgive, to listen." Natalie stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'll choose too, every day." That night, I went home alone. The breeze from Lake Washington swept through the window, carrying the chill of a summer not yet fully bloomed. I turned on the lights, walked into the kitchen, placed my bag on the counter, and paused in front of a small framed photo on the wall. In the picture, Natalie and I were grinning wide during the Fremont grand opening. Next to us stood Mom and Frank. Not perfect, but clearly trying. I'd labeled the photo simply, "Family, Revised Edition." I thought back to everything. The locked room when I was 14, the nights I lay awake hearing Mom cry softly outside my door, the silent phone on Christmas. And then I remembered Mom's trembling voice in therapy, Frank's shaky words when he first called me daughter, and the look in Natalie's eyes whenever I was on the verge of falling apart, a look that never let go. No, I haven't forgotten the past, but I refuse to let it change my future. I understand not everyone gets a chance to rebuild with their family, and not everyone should. But if one day the people who hurt you learn to stop, to say sorry without demanding immediate forgiveness, to listen instead of defend, then maybe they deserve a chance. And you deserve peace, even if it comes late. Family, in the end, isn't just where you're born. It's where you're chosen to stay. A place where people, even after being lost, come back together. Not because of blood, but because they choose to love you the way you deserve to be loved. And on that journey, I'm no longer the girl who was cast aside on Christmas night. I am Angela, a woman who has learned to stand tall, to love herself, and to bravely say, "I deserve to be loved, unconditionally." From my own story, I've learned that family isn't fixed. It's a choice, rebuilt each day with honesty and respect. Sometimes, to find your worth, you have to let go, stand up, and say enough. But if you're lucky, the ones who once hurt you might learn to change. I no longer wait for a perfect family. I only hope for people brave enough to make things right. And I've found them, right in my own family. What do you think about Angela's journey and the transformation of her family? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt, honest stories about family and life in our upcoming episodes. I stood still in front of the reception desk, my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to escape. Under the warm golden light of the Wyndham Hotel's grand ballroom in Chicago, neatly arranged name tags with gold-trimmed edges and bold capital letters lay in perfect rows. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked one up. Ashley, the disappointment of the family. I blinked. Once, then again. As if my eyes were trying to erase the words in front of me. But no, they remained, brazen and cold, just like the stares I had endured for over a decade. No one stood nearby. No apologies, no explanations. Just laughter ringing out from the bar inside, where I knew exactly who was laughing the loudest. A laugh I could never forget because, throughout my teenage years, it had always accompanied sharp, veiled remarks. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Evelyn, my father's second wife. The woman who was always impeccably made up, with voluminous blonde hair and a saccharine smile that sent chills down my spine. She had perfected the art of making me feel small, out of place in the very home I once called my own. I tightened my grip on the name tag, feeling the hard plastic press against my palm. A part of me wanted to throw it to the ground, stomp on it, and walk away. But I knew Evelyn was watching me, waiting for me to react, to lash out, to cause a scene, so she could smirk and say, "See? She never grew up." I took a deep breath. Then, with deliberate calm, I set the name tag back on the table as if it meant nothing. But the truth was, I had just set down the last drop of patience I had left for this family. My father's 60th birthday party, Walter Simmons' grand celebration, was being held in the largest ballroom of the hotel, dripping with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast dazzling reflections over white cloth tables adorned with elegant candelabras and tall-stemmed red roses in glass vases. Everything exuded opulence, as if the event wasn't meant for loved ones but for the elite to congratulate themselves. I stepped into the ballroom, feeling the cold not from the air conditioning but from the sheer invisibility I carried with me. No one turned to greet me. No one called my name. I was a stranger in a sea of glittering guests, shaking hands, clinking glasses, exchanging pleasantries, without sparing me a single glance. I scanned the room, searching for my father, and then I saw him, standing at the center like a statesman. He beamed as he listened to Julian, Evelyn's son, boast about his new job at a top financial firm in New York. Beside him stood Camilla, Evelyn's youngest daughter, gleefully waving her hand to show off an engagement ring to the surrounding guests. My father lifted his head, his gaze passing over me for less than a second, but that was all it took for me to understand he hadn't been expecting me. He hadn't wanted me here. A quiet chuckle escaped my lips, bitter like unsweetened lemonade. What had I been hoping for? A hug? A simple, "Ashley, I'm glad you came, how foolish of me." I veered left toward the drinks table. Grasping a glass of mocktail, I steadied my hands, refusing to let them shake. I didn't want them to see me as weak. I didn't want them to know they had won again. "Oh, Ashley, is that you?" Evelyn's voice cooed beside me, smooth as velvet yet lined with thorns. I turned. She wore an emerald green evening gown, a classic pearl necklace, and bold red lipstick. Her smile was flawless, so perfect, it was eerie. "It's been a while," I replied, my voice light but firm. She tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over me. "What a surprise that you made it. With the freelance work you do, I suppose your schedule is quite flexible." I knew what she meant. No fancy title, no fixed salary, nothing that met the Simmons family's standards. I hadn't even responded when Evelyn lightly patted my shoulder and leaned in, her voice a mere whisper. "By the way, that name tag was adorable. Someone prepared it just for you." I followed her gaze and immediately understood what she was referring to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. I felt only one thing: finality. Because today I would no longer stay silent as I had in years past. I used to believe I was my father's whole world. When I was little, he would take me to the park every Saturday afternoon, buy me strawberry ice cream and sit on a bench listening to me chatter endlessly. I could still remember the warmth of his hand gripping mine as we crossed the street, the sound of his laughter when I fell off my bike for the first time but shouted, "I'm fine anyway." To me, those moments defined love. But it all ended the summer I turned 11, when he brought home a woman named Evelyn and 2 children he called his new family. Evelyn was 39, divorced, a literature teacher who dressed as if she were about to give an award speech. Her son Julian was my age, and her daughter Camila, 3 years younger, was often compared to a living porcelain doll. I vividly remember the first dinner they had in our house that had only ever been just the 2 of us. Evelyn sat in my mother's old chair, using the hand-embroidered napkins my mother had left behind. I didn't say a word. I just watched, feeling something quiet within me shift, like a door silently closing. At first, I tried to fit in. I forced a smile when Evelyn called me Little Ashley, even though her voice sent shivers down my spine. I played with Camila, despite her constant whining, and I attempted to find common ground with Julian. though he only spoke to me when he needed help with homework. But within months, I realized everything had changed, and not for the better. My father started forgetting our one-on-one traditions. Instead, he was always busy with their family outings, Camila's theater performances, Julian's sports tournaments. And me? I was at home, cleaning, babysitting, studying, and learning how to nod politely when Evelyn said, "You're the big sister. You should set an example." I became an unpaid housemaid in my own home. "Ashley, Camila spilled her milk. Clean it up. Ashley, tuck Camila into bed for me. Ashley, don't forget to take out the trash after doing the dishes." Even when it wasn't my fault, I was always the one responsible, and whenever I protested, Evelyn would smile sweetly and say, "Don't make a big deal out of small things." And my father? He would just shake his head, signaling me to stay quiet. I still remember a chilly March afternoon when I was 14. I waited outside school for almost an hour, my hands numb from the lingering Minnesota winter. When I finally got home, mud on my shoes, I found my father in the living room, laughing with Evelyn, Julian, and Camilla, unwrapping early birthday presents for Camilla. No one had remembered me. No one asked why I was late. But the final blow came when I was 17, preparing my college applications. Before she passed, my mother, a meticulous, loving woman, had set up a savings account just for me. She had scraped together every penny for nearly a decade as an accountant, her only wish being for me to have an education and a future of my own. One autumn morning, I checked the account, expecting to find enough for my first 2 years at Northwestern University, my dream school. Instead, the balance showed just 3 numbers, $128. I thought it was a mistake. I called the bank. And then my heart stopped when the teller confirmed that my father had withdrawn every cent 3 months ago for his son's tuition. His son wasn't me, it was Julian. I went home, the bank statement still clenched in my hands. I handed it to my father and asked, "Why?" He spoke as if he were discussing groceries. "Julian got into Michigan State. He needed the money immediately. You're smart. You can get scholarships." I wanted to scream that it was my mother's money, that it was her last gift to me, but I only managed to whisper, "Do you think Mom would have agreed?" He looked at me, said nothing. Then he turned away. That night, I packed my things. Just a few sets of clothes, my journal, and an old photo of my mother and me on my 8th birthday. I left that house in silence. No one saw me off, no one asked why, and no one tried to stop me. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I made a vow to myself. I would never return. At least not as the disappointment they had labeled me. Because in that moment, I knew I had only one choice left: to become the person my mother had always believed I could be. I left home on a crisp October morning, the air just beginning to bite with the arrival of fall. Each breath I exhaled turned into a misty white cloud before me, but inside I burned. Not with anger, but with the certainty that there was no turning back. The only luggage I carried was an old suitcase my mother had used in her college days, along with a few books, a sweater, and what little savings I had from my part-time job at the local bakery. No one saw me off, no hugs, no words of encouragement. As the door closed behind me, I heard laughter from inside, Evelyn and Camila rewatching Julian's birthday video. Meanwhile, I walked away in silence, as if I had never belonged there. I started my new life in Grand Rapids, nearly a 4-hour drive from home. It wasn't a big city, but it was big enough for me to disappear from my father's sight, and from his perfect family. I rented a small basement room from an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, who let me pay rent in weekly installments. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic. At night, I washed dishes at a small Italian restaurant down the street. After 10 p.m., I took online courses, transfer credits to apply to the local public university. I didn't have time to feel sad. I didn't have the energy to dwell on the past. Each day was a cycle of tasks to complete, bills to pay, and long nights spent typing essays under dim yellow light. Meanwhile, Julian, the chosen son, posted pictures of pool parties in his dorm, vacations in Mexico, and brand new sneakers sponsored by Dad. Camila started a vlog titled Life Updates, documenting her new life in a penthouse apartment in Los Angeles. An apartment Vivelin had rented for her while she searched for inspiration to pursue art. I didn't follow them, but whenever their posts appeared on my feed by chance, I simply smirked. Not out of jealousy, but because I knew if I waited for justice, I'd grow old and die in disappointment. So instead of waiting, I chose to act. 2 years later, I was accepted into Western Michigan University with a partial scholarship, thanks to my GPA and an essay titled, "Where Do You Find Strength When There's Nothing Left to Lose?" I wrote that essay in one night, tears soaking my keyboard. But I had never felt stronger. I kept working. By my second year, I started freelancing as a web designer for small businesses. At first, I built basic websites, but over time, I built a solid client network, especially after a regional coffee shop chain adopted my design for all their stores. I didn't stop working. By my final year, I was not only able to cover my tuition, but I had also saved enough to rent my own small apartment. No longer in a basement, no longer falling asleep beside rattling water pipes. I even launched my own website, where clients could book services and browse my portfolio. On the day of my graduation, I stood among hundreds of students, sunlight warming my black gown and cap. Around me, people cheered, hugged, threw flowers, and posed for endless photos. Meanwhile, I stood quietly, smiling, and wrapped my arms around myself. No one from my family came. No one asked what I had majored in. No one congratulated me. But I didn't need them. I had myself, the only person who would never abandon me. After the ceremony, I walked home alone, bought myself a small cake and a smoothie. I lit a candle, took a picture, and wrote in my journal, "I did it." Without anyone. For the longest time, I thought they had forgotten me. After all, I had cut off contact. But I was wrong. Every year, on special occasions like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I still received formal party invitations from Evelyn, printed on fine stationery, with sweetly worded messages like, "We hope you'll come home and reunite with your family." I never replied. But I kept the letters, not to read, but to remind myself. They only remembered me when they needed me to complete their perfect family picture. I kept building my career. At 24, I started a small digital design firm called Lighthouse Studio, named after what my mother used to call me, my little light. I hired 2 employees and expanded my clientele to neighboring areas. And Julian? One day I came across an article he'd been fired from his first job after just 6 months. Camila? She shut down her vlog after a flood of negative comments, accusing her of wasting money without producing real art. As for me, every morning I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, reviewed new contracts, and reminded myself, I don't live to prove anything to them. I live to keep my promise to myself. To never go back to where I started. I once believed that if I became successful enough, if I proved myself, they would look at me differently. But I was wrong. So many times. Even though I had been gone for nearly 6 years, I occasionally showed up at major family gatherings, mainly due to pressure from my mother's side of the family. They still believed in family above all, not knowing or refusing to acknowledge that this so-called family had left me alone in the freezing cold without a second thought. But I didn't blame them. They only knew what Evelyn told them, that I was the rebellious child who isolated herself to pursue some vague digital art dream. On Christmas Eve of my 25th year, I received a call from Aunt Carol, my late mother's younger sister. "Ashley, at least come to Christmas dinner. For me," she said, "it would make me happy if you came." I had 1,000 reasons to say no. But I owed her too much. From the times she secretly slipped me lunch money in high school, to her short but heartfelt holiday texts. I couldn't refuse. So I went. It was a bitterly cold night, snow covering the path leading to my father's mansion. The house was lit up like always, strings of colored lights glowing, a massive Christmas tree nearly reaching the ceiling, decked out in golden baubles and red ribbons. I stepped inside, and almost instantly the cold outside was replaced by another kind of chill, the one in Evelyn's gaze. "Oh, Ashley, you made it," she said, her voice laced with mock surprise. "It's good to see you finally remembered your way home." I didn't respond, just nodded at a few familiar relatives. Aunt Carol rushed over and hugged me, her warm smile the only thing keeping me from regretting my decision. The dining room was meticulously arranged, a long table draped in red velvet, candlelight flickering against crystal glasses, and a perfectly curated spread of traditional holiday dishes. Julian sat at the head of the table, boasting about his recent company-sponsored business trip to San Francisco. Camilla flaunted her new art collection, currently exhibited at a modern gallery in Santa Monica, a connection Evelyn helped arrange. My father sat in the center, looking like the ruler of a small kingdom. When I stepped into the dining room, he glanced up for a brief moment, then turned away, as if I were nothing more than a passing breeze. Dinner passed in the suffocating atmosphere I had long grown accustomed to. I ate in silence, ignoring the pretentious conversations. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they turned their attention to me. And right on cue, after dessert was served, my father set down his glass and turned to me, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. "You're still doing that little design thing, right?" I looked up, meeting his scrutinizing gaze. Every eye at the table was on me, waiting for my response. Or rather, waiting to see me fumble. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I still run my digital design firm. This year, I signed a contract with a nationwide hotel chain." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Sounds impressive. Strange, though. I don't recall seeing your name in the papers." Julian laughed loudly, adding, "Or is it still just designing websites for that little bakery down the street?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My father crossed his arms, took a slow sip of his drink, and said, "You're smart. I won't deny that. But if you had listened sooner, joined me at the company, you'd have a real position by now. The way you do business, it's too unstable." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't concern or worry, no matter how much he tried to make it seem that way. It was fear. Fear that I could succeed without him. Fear that I would prove him wrong. I smiled, soft but unwavering. I don't need a position handed to me. I build my own." The table fell silent. Not because I had spoken loudly, but because no one had expected me to respond like that. This wasn't the same Ashley who used to know her place. This wasn't the child who sat quietly in the corner, trying not to draw attention. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was simply telling the truth. That night, as everyone cleaned up and the children gathered around the tree to open presents, I left that house in silence, just as I had when I was 18. But this time, it wasn't because I was being pushed out. It was because I had chosen not to belong there anymore. And the most surprising part? When I stepped outside, I didn't feel as cold as I had when I arrived. Maybe because I knew that the next time someone asked, "Why don't you come home?" I would smile and answer, "I have a home of my own." I was still standing there, right by the reception desk at my father's 60th birthday party, staring at the name tag. Ashley. The disappointment of the family? The chandelier above cast shimmering light onto the marble floor, but all I felt was a deep, lingering chill. Laughter rang through the air, glasses clinked, and soft jazz melodies floated from the live band in the corner. Everything was staged perfectly, a flawless tableau of a model family. A meticulously crafted picture, except for me. The ink stain that had been crossed out, yet still bled through. I could leave. I had left before. But this time I didn't want to retreat in silence. I was no longer the Ashley who endured quietly, who bit her tongue and pretended not to hear the jabs. Not tonight. I stepped into the grand hall where my father, Walter Simmons, stood at the center of his circle of guests. Dressed in a gray suit, silk tie, holding his wine glass as if he were delivering a presidential speech, Evelyn stood close by, her hand lightly touching his arm whenever he said something that made the guests laugh. I walked straight to the bar and took a glass of water. I didn't need alcohol to make me strong. As I turned back, my eyes met Camilla's. She stood with a group of people, probably social media influencers. Her expression wavered between curiosity and disdain. Then Julian noticed me too, exchanging a pointed glance with his mother. I lifted my glass and tapped it lightly. A soft ting rang out, not loud, but enough to turn a few heads. I stepped forward, right into the center of the room where all the lights converged. I took a deep breath. "Sorry to interrupt the celebration," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, just enough to make the surrounding chatter die down. My father's eyes widened for a brief second before he raised an eyebrow, about to say something, but I continued before he could. Tonight is my father's 60th birthday, a milestone, a life of success, power, and remarkable talent in deciding who is worthy to be called his child. The air thickened. A few whispers spread through the crowd. Evelyn straightened her posture, pressing her lips together. "Some of you may not know," I went on. "I'm Ashley, the only daughter of Walter Simmons. But judging by how he treats me, you'd think I was just another stranger at this party." I lifted my chin, locking eyes with him. "Your daughter, the one erased from family photos. The one you never showed up for at a single graduation. The one you scoffed at whenever my career was mentioned because it didn't align with what you wanted." No one spoke. I could hear my own heartbeat, but my voice remained steady. "Tonight, someone left me a gift. A name tag labeled, 'The Disappointment of the Family.' How thoughtful, how creative. But if you thought that would make me bow my head, then you forgot one thing. I have learned to stand tall, without any of you holding me up." I turned to Evelyn, my voice lower, colder. "Evelyn, you've spent over a decade trying to erase me. From dinner tables, from photo frames, from college funds, from my father's trust. But you forgot one thing. I'm still here. I exist. And I am not afraid of you anymore." Evelyn's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. I shifted my gaze to Julian and Camila. "Julian, Camila, you had everything. Favoritism, money, opportunities I could only dream of. But I wonder, without my father's backing, how far would either of you really go?" I placed my glass on the table beside me. Gently, firmly. "Dad," I said, calling him that for the first time in years. For so long, I only wanted one thing: to be seen as myself, not as a replica of someone else, not as a mold you created. But I understand now. That will never happen." I smiled, a light, razor-sharp smile. "And I also understand I don't need that to keep moving forward." I took a step back, turning away, my gaze sweeping over the entire room. The stunned faces, the uneasy whispers, the discomfort in their eyes. "I hope you all enjoy the rest of the party," I said, louder this time. "Because this will be the last time you see me." No one stopped me. No one dared. I left the room, the door closing softly behind me, cold, but not as cold as the years I had spent being forgotten. I stepped outside, tilting my head up. The Chicago night wind howled, but I had never felt more at ease. Freedom had never been clearer. The doors to the banquet hall shut behind me in a strange silence, as if the world inside had been severed entirely. I walked down the long hallway, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Cold, final, no more music, no more dazzling chandeliers, no more scrutinizing gazes clinging to me like they had for years. There was only me, and the sweet quiet of freedom. I got into my car, sitting in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The streetlights cast a faint glow onto the windshield, reflecting my face in the rearview mirror. Not the girl who once longed for her father to turn back, Not the girl who wished Evelyn would change. Not the girl who hoped Julian or Camila would treat her like family. I looked into my own eyes and saw something I had never seen so clearly before. My phone vibrated. A message popped up from Evelyn. Ashley, you embarrassed the entire family. That behavior was absolutely unacceptable. I didn't bother reading the rest. The next message came from Julian. So childish, always playing the victim. Then Camila. If your life is hard, that's your choice. Don't blame anyone else. I scrolled through them silently. No anger, no tears, just a quiet nod to myself. I did the right thing. Then the last message made me pause. The sender, Dad, call me, we need to talk. I set my phone down on the seat beside me and started the car. The engine purred softly in the quiet night. I drove away from the hotel, following the riverbank where city lights shimmered over the rippling water. No destination in mind, just the need to get away, to let my mind breathe for once. By the time I arrived at my small apartment, the clock was nearing midnight. I locked the door, hung up my coat, and turned on the warm yellow light in the living room. The space was modest but tidy, carefully curated. Every piece of furniture, every bookshelf, every chair, every framed picture was something I had chosen for myself. A reflection of the life I had built with my own hands. My phone continued buzzing. Messages, missed calls, social media notifications, all from them. No apologies, no concern for how I was feeling. Just blame, outrage, and demands for me to come back and take responsibility for their humiliation. I opened my contacts, scrolling through the names one by one. Evelyn, blocked. Julian, blocked. Camilla, blocked. And finally, my father, blocked. Silence. Like shutting a door that should have been closed long ago. The next morning, I woke to birds chirping outside my window. No notifications, no messages dragging me back into an old reality. I brewed coffee, played soft jazz, and opened my laptop to start work as usual. But I knew everything was different now. Mid-morning, an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. A familiar voice spoke, calm but with a clear effort to restrain itself. Ashley, it's your father. I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes for a moment. I know. Not even one call? Not even a word? I said nothing. Then, slowly, I replied, What do you want to say? A heavy sigh came through the phone. You went too far last night. No matter how upset you were, you shouldn't have made a scene in front of everyone. People are talking. My reputation... Your reputation? I cut him off. My voice wasn't raised, but it was firm. You never cared about my dignity all these years. But now you're worried about yours? When did you become so bitter, Ashley? Maybe the day you forgot I existed as part of this family. Silence. I continued, letting the words spill out like stones finally lifted from my chest. You're only calling because you want control. Because you're afraid people will find out your daughter doesn't fit into the perfect family you've created. But you know what? I spent years in silence, in pitiful glances, in the constant feeling of being pushed aside, and now, I choose a different kind of silence, the kind where none of you have a place in my life anymore. I ended the call. She didn't wait for him to respond. 1 second later, I blocked his number. No goodbyes, no regrets, no looking back. I stood up, threw open the window, and let the crisp morning air rush in. The scent of coffee still lingered in the air, and my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that from that moment on, I was finally living, not as a shadow in someone else's story, but as the main character in my own. A week after that fateful birthday party, I sat in my favorite cafe near the office, hands wrapped around a warm latte. The past few days had passed in a quiet, liberating calm. No more flashing notifications. No more Evelyn's voice echoing in my mind whenever I tried to rest. No more guilt-driven thoughts telling me to call home, just to prove I wasn't ungrateful. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not the kind of lightness that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from finally loosening an invisible rope that had been strangling me for half my life. I felt no guilt, not even a little. If anything, I felt like I had finally stopped pretending. I used to believe I needed their approval. I thought if I tried a little harder, if I was a little kinder, if I was a little better, maybe my father would look at me the way he looked at Julian. Maybe Evelyn would stop mocking me. Maybe Camila would stop treating me like I was beneath her. But after years of being pushed aside, I understood the truth. Validation from people who never intended to give it was nothing more than an illusion. No matter how hard I tried, I would never be enough for them. One Sunday morning, sunlight streamed through my white curtains as I stood in my living room, small but warm, and asked myself, if today were the first day I could truly live for myself, what would I do? I put on a classical playlist, opened my planner, and wrote the first words in blue ink. Live for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. I started making time for things I had once put aside, the paintings I never finished, the books I left halfway through, the cafes I always wanted to visit but skipped because I was too busy proving my worth. I re-uploaded a few personal design projects on my company's website, not client work, just things I created simply because they made me feel alive. And to my surprise, a week later, a boutique furniture brand from Portland reached out, asking if I would collaborate on their fall campaign. We want something with soul, and we see that in your designs. I read that sentence over and over. No talk of fitting industry standards, no demands to match market trends. Just an honest recognition of my work, from people who had no idea who my father was, who valued me for what I created, not for where I came from. That feeling of being seen for my own talent, not for my place in a family, was what I had been searching for all along. One afternoon, I sat in the park with Aunt Carol, her hand gently holding mine. You know, Ashley, she said softly, since your mother passed, I always worried you'd be swallowed up by the coldness of that household. But today, looking at you, I'm so proud. I squeezed her hand. I didn't need anyone else. I just needed one person who truly saw me, and that was enough. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just about leaving a house, a party, or a phone call. True freedom was letting go of the need to be accepted in order to exist. I no longer needed my father's approval to believe in my own worth. I didn't need Evelyn's fake smiles to feel loved. I didn't need Julian or Camila to stop flaunting their privilege for me to know I wasn't lesser. All I needed was me, the person who had survived it all, who stood strong, and who had never let her heart grow cold. There were days when I still thought about the past, but not with bitterness, just as a part of the journey. Every wound had taught me something. Every act of neglect had taught me to remember myself. And every time I was pushed away, I had been brought closer to the truth. Not everyone who carries the title of family truly brings you love. It was a lesson I'd paid for with my youth. But I knew there was nothing more valuable than the freedom to walk forward, unburdened, never again needing permission to be myself. Because now I was no longer the disappointment of the family. I was my own greatest pride. From my own story, I've realized no one has the right to define your worth except for you. Family isn't always a safe place if it forces you to forget who you are. True freedom isn't found in acceptance. It's found in having the courage to walk away from relationships that hurt you. I no longer live to please others. Now I live to honor myself, the person who endured it all and never looked back. What do you think about Ashley's journey? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, resilience, and self-discovery.